So in this video, I'm giving an overview of how I designed Gandalf's staff. This was for my Halloween costume this year, where I was Gandalf the Grey. So the first step in the process is deciding which staff to do. Gandalf the White has a different staff than Gandalf the Grey, and between the Hobbit and the Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf the Grey even uses two different staffs. I picked the staff that he is seen using as they go through Moria.
Well, as we get into Fusion here, I'm going to have to apologize. I'm not sure why my screen recorder did not, for some reason, capture all of the things you see when you're in Fusion. I don't have my list of bodies or canvases or sketches. For some reason, that's not showing up, and it looks like when I do measurements, the numbers are also not showing up. I apologize for that. I'll try to explain what I'm doing here.
Now, I went ahead and did an estimate of how big I wanted the staff to be. So once you decide how big you want it to be, you can insert what we call a canvas. A canvas is basically a picture that we can put down, which I use as kind of a tracing pad. So I scale up the canvas by doing the calibrate option here.
So again, you can't see it on my screen, but to use the calibrate, you're going to click on your canvas over here. You'll right click and choose calibrate. This will let you draw a line from one point of the image to the other, and then you will type in the length between those 2 points. This allows us to scale up our canvas to the size of what we want our object to be when we finish printing.
I'm just going to set a plane where I can start a sketch. I make a basic cylinder. Keep in mind, I am going to be putting a 3/4 inch diameter PVC pipe through the center of this, so it needs to be at least that big. Once you have decided the size, the diameter you want of your staff, you're just going to finish that sketch and extrude it to be as tall as the other mark that you made. Now, in this program, I am not going to attempt to make the head of the staff. It is just too much of a organic, irregular shape that would be just tricky to make in Fusion. I think there's a much easier way using Fusion 360's sister program, Mesh Mixer.
So once we bring our file into Mesh Mixer, really we're going to be using the sculpting tool here. I typically stay on the volume mode. Now, there's no real rhyme or reason here. I just started by drawing lines and kind of pulling them up. You notice you can play around with the strength and size of your tool here to get your look that you want. But this is really the creative process. You know, think of what tree bark looks like. They run in lines, continuous lines. And I start, personally, I start with more large shapes. So, you know, I have these bigger veins, and then we're going to go back and add smaller ones over top of them. As we get to the top of the staff, you can see I'm just expanding out the clay, the digital clay here, to make the shape of the head of the staff. Now, you can't really see it on my screen record here, but I have a picture of Gandalf's staff next to me while I'm doing this, and I'm just trying to mimic as best I can the way these top little branches curl around. I have to keep in mind too that I am going to be putting a crystal here, so I am leaving a space for that. Just like the lower part of the staff, once I get this in the general shape that I want it, I start adding more finer details and kind of start with a little bit larger and then add smaller veins. Just pay attention, look at pictures of trees or real trees if you don't live in the desert like me, to kind of figure out a good pattern that makes sense and looks realistic. I have these little knots in the wood, so I make a kind of a radial pattern where it circles outward. Again, this is just, you know, you keep playing with it until you're happy with the look. Once we get the detail on here the way we like it, I actually like to take this back into Fusion. So we'll export it out of Mesh Mixer. And now when we go back into Fusion and we open that STL, and what's kind of cool here is it's actually going to place it in the same position and orientation as our original raw cylinder. Not as big of a deal here, but there's other projects I've worked on where that's really handy, where it goes right back in the same position after I've added some detail and texture here. Now, the reason I'm bringing it back into Fusion is so that I can hollow out the center with precision. Keep in mind, I am going to be putting a PVC pipe down the middle of this, so I need to cut a hole through the center where that pipe can fit. I do give a little bit of tolerance, maybe 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter. Everybody's printer is a little bit different, so you kind of have to play around with it and figure out what the tolerance is for your printer and how much space you need to get between parts so that it all fits together nicely, not too snug, but also not too loose. Since our textured staff is an STL and not a body. We can't edit it the same way we did with the cylinder at the beginning. So instead, I have to basically create with the body the PVC pipe. I do the sketch just like before. We make the cylinder, run it straight through the middle of the staff. And you see I extend it beyond because I do want that hole to go all the way through the top because that's where our crystal will sit. We are then going to convert this cylinder representing the PVC into an STL. To do this, we use the tessellate option. This you have to change to the mesh tab. Click tessellate and boom, that cylinder is now an STL. And now these two meshes can talk to each other. So I'm going to click combine and you'll notice there's the option here to, instead of join, I can say cut. I'm going to have them cut and I want the tool body to be the PVC cylinder. I want the target body, that's what's going to be affected, to be the staff. Now that we have a hollow shaft, we are going to create the crystal. For the crystal, we're going to use the create form function. Now, what we're doing here is first creating a plane, but we get to decide how many faces we're putting on it. Obviously, the more faces you put, the more points you're going to be able to edit and essentially get finer detail. Fortunately, a crystal is a very polygonal structure, sharp edges and broad faces, so we don't need all that many. And basically what we're going to do here is just tug and pull on these different faces until we get the shape of a crystal. Again, I'm not following any specific pattern, just kind of looking at pictures of the crystal and trying to do something that will both mimic the look of the crystal, but still have a base that can fit into the slot I've created at the top of the staff. Now this next part's really unfortunate because the file of the video capture, the screen grab, got corrupted and I don't have it to show you here. But essentially what would go here is the part where I create the slot for the battery pack. Again, this is going to be powering an LED light, and so I used a AA battery holder. Basically what I did was I took the dimensions of that holder and I created a box of those dimensions, maybe just a little bit larger, again, for that tolerance we talked about. And I used that to cut a slot up towards the top of the staff. I also cut a hole for the button, again, just making a cylinder and tessellating it, turning it into a mesh and using it to cut the staff, just like we did with the PVC. Basically, the way this is going to go, the PVC will run up most of the staff until it gets close to the top. There will be a small gap where the battery holder is, and then a second piece of PVC will run up the rest of the staff up toward the top. Obviously, I've been showing some videos and photos of the finished product. You'll notice that I did create a cover for this as well. The cover, I cut little holes for small magnets, and so the cover is held into place with magnets. Now, obviously, my printer is not going to be able to print this in one single piece. The printer has a build volume of 250 millimeters cubed, and so I give a little bit of tolerance just to make it easier. I basically draw segments of 240 millimeters. Basically, you create a flat plane, and you're able to use the splitting tool here to split the mesh along that plane. Once I've got this split into smaller pieces, this step is maybe not necessary, but I like to do this. I basically add little notches to the top of each piece and corresponding holes. These little notches serve essentially as registration marks. It keeps all the pieces lined up when we're assembling it all together. Finally, now that the staff is designed, we can print it. I printed mine just out of a wood-colored PLA filament. For the crystal, I did use my resin printer using a clear, transparent resin. Now that we have all the pieces, we're going to put it together. I decided to use JB Weld, as this is a really good glue for these two materials. Now, if you've never used JB Weld before, this is a glue that you're supposed to apply to both surfaces you're going to stick together. You want to let it sit, and then you want to push the two pieces together. This gets a little bit tricky because we were sliding these pieces down. I ended up having to use a smaller little rod as almost like a brush to coat the central cavity of the staff pieces with the glue. And then, of course, just a brush on the PVC. I didn't wait quite the full time before sliding the staff pieces on, just because I didn't want them to start adhering before I got them pushed down all the way to the next piece. I also used super glue to attach the PLA pieces to each other, just to give it a little extra strength. Once we got up to the piece that holds the battery and this switch, I paused to get that component all set up. If you haven't worked with LED lights before, it's actually pretty simple. Your battery holder is going to have a positive and negative lead. The positive you're going to tie up to the switch, and then the other switch you're going to connect to the positive line of your LED light. I ended up using 3 LEDs just to give it a little bit of a brighter appearance, and even still, it's kind of wimpy LEDs, but it still looked all right, got the job done. Once we got the rest of the staff in place on the PVC and all glued together, it was time to try to hide those seam lines. I just used a basic wood filler putty. Just apply a little where those seams are, and then you're going to sand away the excess. I didn't spend a ton of time smoothing these out completely. I figured, you know, this is supposed to look like natural wood. There's going to be little lines, little cracks, little defects. And so I didn't have to do a whole lot of work, but you know, a basic coating does go a long way. At this point, it was time for paint. I typically just use basic spray paint when I do these types of projects. I just used a couple shades of brown, a little bit of a green that I had to, very sparingly with that, and put that down first. But I think that some of those little tones, when they shine through the brown, just give it a little bit more of an organic look as opposed to a solid dark brown color. Finally, once it was painted, all that was left to do is to glue the crystal on top, and our staff is finished. It's held up pretty well. It did unfortunately get knocked over when it was leaning against a wall on 2 different occasions, and both times the staff did break right about at the spot where it is the weakest, right where that battery holder is, and there's no PVC to support it. You know, in theory, I could have made the staff a little bit thicker and have the PVC running alongside the battery pack. I do think that would have made it a little too thick. I think right now it's very comfortable to grasp my hand around. So despite that little weak spot, you know, if you're careful and not letting it fall and crash to the ground, you know, you should be fine. It is pretty sturdy overall. To repair that, I did basically solder and just kind of melt those 2 pieces back together, which did leave some kind of ugly grooves in it, but a little bit of paint, a little bit of wood filler again can help hide those. And that's basically how we made the staff. I know we kind of went quickly through a lot of this, so if you have any questions or points that I didn't explain very well, you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and I'll try to get back to you on those and help you figure stuff out. Hopefully this helps with any projects you have, and if you wanted to print this staff for yourself, I've got the link down below in the description for the files. Thanks, guys.